Greetings everyone, this is your boy Curtis, aka Dr. C, checking in with you. Here to talk to you about the fraud of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. This is a very interesting topic that I've had researched as of lately, and it amazes me how government essentially protects vaccine manufacturers and big commercial interests, oftentimes at the expense of the American consumer. So a brief history about this the creation of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, or the VCIP, is that back in the early 70s and 80s, and for a long time now, people were getting injured from vaccines. Particularly the diphtheria vaccine caused encephalitis. And what happened was that when people would get injured, they would file civil claims and go to civil court. And the juries, when the case was legitimate and it was proved that the vaccine actually caused the particular ailment that the person was suffering with, they award these particular manufacturers sometimes millions of dollars in damages. So this happened. It happened even in 1976 with the original swine flu vaccine. There were over $1 billion in claims that the government were filed against the government, over 3,000 people who filed injuries claiming that the swine flu vaccine, which was released in 76, injured them. Now, I've discussed how basically the government has now given swine flu makers legal immunity now, but these lawsuits were coming in, and of course these lawsuits were bankrupting many of these vaccine manufacturers because they continued into the 70s and into the 80s. And essentially, the vaccine manufacturers got together and said, "Hey, government, we're getting bankrupted. Create some legislation for me so I can stay in business." And that's exactly what Congress did in 1986 with the passing of the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which created the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, beginning on October 1st of 1988. So, if you read the legislation of this particular bill, which I will post a link for, it says to basically to protect vaccine manufacturers. There are two key statements in there, which you can look at the website. And it essentially says, to minimize, to stabilize the costs of vaccine manufacturers, i.e., to reduce the amount of lawsuits or the fees associated with the lawsuits, and also to ensure a steady supply of vaccines, i.e., to make sure we protect vaccine manufacturers, even though people are getting hurt. So when you read this legislation, you're like, wow, this is very clear. The government has made it very clear that they will protect vaccine manufacturers at all costs. And this particular National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, it was designed to minimize the amount of fees or rewards that were given to people who were injured by vaccines, and also to reduce the amount of lawsuits that were actually brought against the vaccine manufacturers, because according to research, 2 out of every 3 claims that are filed within this court are denied. Now, the whole process is that, originally, as I mentioned earlier, people could go to civil court and file a claim against the vaccine manufacturers or sue them. Now, it is required that you first file a claim in the National Vaccine Compensation Program first, and then if you don't like the outcome, then you can go to civil court. But oftentimes, the process gets dragged out. It might last from 2 or 3 years. Oftentimes, the people, even if they do receive any type of compensation, the commissioners who will be in charge of reimbursing the people will try to nickel and dime the consumers. And the vaccine manufacturers don't even pay for the program. Because remember now, people who used to file claims against vaccine manufacturers, that money was coming out of their pocket. If your child suffered encephalitis or some other type of severe allergic reaction and you incurred some fees, you could go to court, and the vaccine manufacturer had to pay for some of those damages, oftentimes in the millions of dollars. Now, there's been a cap on the amount of money that can be given, and the program is actually paid for by the vaccine consumer. Now, ain't that something? The program is paid for by excise tax on vaccines that are sold here in America. So the vaccine manufacturers don't even pay for their program, and they also don't even pay for their lawyers, because when you file a claim within this federally created vaccine court, which is, as I mentioned earlier, a complete fraud, the government actually defends the vaccine manufacturers. The vaccine manufacturers don't even pay for the Department of Justice lawyers, which defend the vaccine makers, because it is a federal no-fault system. Essentially, the government is admitting or saying that hey, some injuries might have occurred, but it's not our fault, and we are not to be to blame for it. So this court essentially, it has been very, very profitable for vaccine manufacturers. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole premise of this court was to protect the vaccine manufacturers at all costs at the expense of the American consumer or taxpayer. And so essentially, with the new ruling ruled in February that there was no link between vaccines and autism, people now, you are definitely vaccinating at your own risk. If you decide to get a vaccination, your claim will probably be denied, and even if it is not denied, you have to prove, due to current policies within this particular program, you have a very high burden of proof. Essentially, government lawyers oftentimes will debate you on whether some of these diseases, which have been traditionally known to be caused by vaccines, could have even been caused by the particular vaccine which you were given. So, the whole program, from its creation down to how it's being currently used, and actually the trust fund actually has a $2 billion surplus in it, which essentially means that even though people are paying for this, or vaccine consumers are paying for this via the excise tax, the government's not even giving the money out. So it's just a major fraud, people. I tell people all the time, vaccinate at your own risk. If you decide to vaccinate, just know that there is a very high likelihood that you will not receive any type of damages. And even if you do receive a claim, or you are rewarded something, the claim might be insufficient to what you actually need to cover your particular costs for a person who has autism, for example. It has been noted that $250,000 is way less than the cost that costs most people here in this country to treat autistic children. They're very usually special cases. So and those rates now have increased from they've gone from 1 in 10,000 to like 1 in 100, the amount of people who have autism in this country. So I say again to people, vaccinate at your own risk. Just to let you all know that I will be putting out some information on my legal vaccine exemption services. You could send me an email for that, curtisl_DUNCAN@yahoo.com. And you can also join my latest teleclass on how to avoid vaccines coming up this Thursday. You can still sign up for it. I'm very excited, because I want to prevent all this stuff from happening. So, and you can legally prevent it. Because remember now, vaccines are not mandatory. So that's all I have to say about this. Thank you so much, everyone. Peace.